Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we will be talking about the various urban land use models. So we'll be starting with the first model, that is the concentric zone model. The concentric zone model was propounded by Burgess in 1927. So this model mainly focused on the Anglo-American cities in United States and Canada. It was mainly during the time where there was high industrialization in the region. So let's talk about the five regions that were talked about by Burgess. So Burgess talked about the central region, that is the central business district, is the downtown region with high density of commercial population. It has a lot of vertical buildings, high population density, and it has the region. It is the region with highest PLVI, that is peak land value intersection. Next is the zone B, that is the manufacturing and the wholesaling zone, deals with industrial and factories in this region. It is known as zone of transition. It is basically low density commercial population. Since there are a lot of manufacturing and industries in this region, the next to it is the region of low class housing where the working population live. Now, this working population, according to Burgess, prefers to live close to the industries, so they don't have to commute a lot. They can even walk to the factories. So it's basically the region of working class, blue collar people, also known as the inner city or zone of independent worker homes. And it is a high density of residential population since a lot of working class people are living in this zone. So zone C is high density residential, zone A is high density commercial. Now next to it is this region D, that is the middle class housing. It is the region of suburb. Mainly the people residing here are the professional people who are engaged in white collar jobs. So it is also known as zone of better residences, and it is a low density residential region. The outermost region is the region of the kind of most wealthy people living in the region. It's upper class housing, lot of estates in the region with exurbs. So what is an exurb? Exurb is a region where wealthy people live outside and they kind of practice suitcase farms. So suitcase farms is the farmer of the main who works in the main city have a huge land on the periphery. So this region is also known as the region for suitcase farmers, and it's a kind of very low density of residential people living in this zone, and most of the people here are kind of commuting population. Now, rings of a tree depict a classic example to help you remember what is Burgess models. So as the rings grow from the center to outside, and we say the age of tree is growing. Similarly, you have the city that grows from the inner CBD, and you have the concentric rings on the periphery that shows that the city is growing outwards. Now, any model we study, we must know the basics behind that model. So this model is basically based on the bid-trend curve. Now, what is the bid-trend curve? You have the real estate pricing versus the PLVI, that is peak land value intersection price, which is decreasing here. Okay, and here is the curve. So the region closest to the center would have the highest value in terms of real estate price, and that real estate price would keep on decreasing as you go on the periphery. So the basic features of this model are it follows concentric rings. Wealthy people prefer to live on the periphery of the region away from the main city. The working class population is mainly dominated near to the industrial zone. Since they cannot afford to commute a long distances, they prefer to live in the city center. Also, they surround the industrial and the residential area of the region. The next is the basic criticism of the concentric zone theory. The first and the foremost criticism is this model was based on the US and Canadian cities, and since this follows the typical US and Canadian model, it is kind of, I can say, reverse from what is going on in the rest of the world. Okay, so in the rest of the world, you have decentralization of industries that is common. So it does not take into consideration the concept of decentralization. You have all the industries located in zone B. It does not talk about unevenness in the surface, so it talks about the isotropic plane, which is not the reality again, and it does not fit the polycentric model. Polycentric cities we already studied in the last session where we talked about collaboration, the two types, monocentric and polycentric. So it also does not fit into the polycentric model of the city growth. So this was the first model that we have talked about, which is the concentric zone model. The next model we would be discussing is known as the sector theory proposed by Hoyt. So here is the sector theory. Now sector theory was given by Hoyt in 1939, much later than the concentric zone theory. So 1939 you have the sector zone theory, and this sector zone theory talks about the things that are similar to a kind of cake slices. So you have the slices of the cake and that depict a kind of sectors, and this is the easiest example to help you remember this. So you have the central business district here, then you have the various sectors, so these are the factories here. Near the factories you have the low class residential population. So you have the low class residential population which basically deals with the factory works there. Okay, next to it is the kind of middle class residential population which is given in yellow color. So you have the middle class residential population, and finally you have the population that is going away from it, and that is a kind of urban elite population. So urban elite population kind of penetrates from the main region and it goes outwards. Now, what is the basic characteristics of this urban elite population here? So the urban elite population here says the similar thing as that was given in the previous concept. So you have the urban elite population living here, which is away from the main industrial sector. So you have the elite corridor, which is also known as the boulevard, and this boulevard is kind of away from what is known as the industrial sector. So you have this population here. So this theory basically talks about cutting the things into various sectors. Okay. So you have the various sectors of population here. The main essence of this theory, now let's move on to the main essence of this theory. So the main essence of this theory is, it is a kind of modification of the concentric zone theory. Okay, since it is a modification of the concentric zone theory, it considers growth in sectors rather than a continuous growth like the concentric zone theory. Then it also talks about movement that is going outwards. So you have a high class residential that is directly moving out from the CBD. So you have the elite corridor or the boulevard region. And finally, the most important critic of this theory, that is the most important thing we must know, it does not consider the physical factors in the region. So if there is a natural river flowing through or a natural mountain that is cutting across, it does not take that into consideration. So it does not involve any physical feature that is crossing the region. It is based on the 20th century model of transportation. So that is one of the positive things. But it again does not consider that growth is limited in the sense that it is limited by kind of leapfrog development. So you have a kind of leapfrog land use pattern, and that limits the growth of the city. And finally, it talks about the low-class residential or the ethnic neighborhood, which is a kind of immigrant population. And that is again not true, because we cannot say that you are segregating a kind of ethnic group here. That is always the case with. So these were some of the limitations of the Hoyt's model. The next theory we would be talking about is the multiple nuclei theory. So under the multiple nuclei theory, Harris and Ullman in 1945 propounded the concept of nature of cities in one of their books. So you have the nature of cities. In that book, they basically gave this concept, and what they tried to explain here was that the development of city does not follow any specific pattern. So it's a kind of refinement over the concentric theory, and the sector theory. What it says is basically this is the CBD. Near the CBD you have the wholesale manufacturing that is coming up. Because there is a wholesale manufacturing here, there is a low class residential population, that is a kind of mid class residential population, and you have an upper class residential population here. So since there is a CBD here, there is again a CBD that comes up in this area, and the city tries to decentralize. So you have heavy manufacturing here. Now this region starts to develop as industrial suburb, and this region becomes a kind of residential suburb. So we cannot say there is any specific pattern for growth of the city here. So it's kind of similar to a choco chip cookie. So you have the CBD here, which is the main core of the city, and then rest of the development you cannot say there is a fixed pattern. So we are saying there is a pattern, but we cannot say that this pattern will remain constant for all the cities. Now the most important characteristic of this theory was multiple nuclei theory focused on specialization. So you have kind of a specialization. Then because there is a specialization, there is also decentralization. So you have two central business districts, you have two industrial centers, and this is the first theory that focused mainly on suburbs. So you have industrial suburbs, you have residential suburbs. Now the basic theory, the basic concept in this theory was, since there are more and more cars, more and more vehicles, more and more transportation facilities, people try to focus on specialization because they are not bothered about the distance they have to commute. So they do not want the things to be near to the CBD. They are happy even if they are outside the core business district. So this theory mainly talks about few important things. First is the location suitability. So this region must be suitable for residential because there is no upcoming industries here. This region is suitable for industries because all the things that would be coming up in this region would be dealing with industrial activities. Okay, so first is the location suitability, that is most important. Then we already talked about specialization. Then you have the land use. So the compatibility and the incompatibility of land use is the most important thing that we need to understand here. Okay, so the best example that we can understand here is, as we mentioned here, the chocolate chip wine. Now, the next topic we would be covering, or the next theory we would be covering, is the galactic city theory. So the galactic city theory is also known as the peripheral city model. So you have the old CBD here that is lying into the center, and on the periphery you have the specializations that are coming up. So you have light industrial parks, R&D park, computing services, railway and retail mart. So what is happening here? You have good transportation networks from the main CBD, and that leads to connectivity to the various specializations. Now the most important focus here is this growth is similar to a kind of firework. So you have the firework which starts from the center and kind of radiates in all direction. So you have specializations coming up, again similar to the multiple nuclei theory. You have kind of specializations. Then the most important thing here is decentralization. So you are trying to decentralize things. Now since you are decentralizing, another important concept here is the decentralization is taking place far from the CBD. Since it is far from the CBD, the cost of land is low. Since the cost of land is low, you can acquire large lands, and these large lands can provide you centers for economic zones, industrial parks, R&D facilities, then you have computing services and so on. So you have large lands which can provide you region which you can get here, and these large lands decrease your cost, and since your cost is less, you increase the employment opportunities here. So that was the basic concept of the galactic city model or the periphery city model. So here you have a three-dimensional view where you can see you have the CBD here, and then you have the outlying services that are developing on the peripheral region. So this is what is a CBD. The best, the galactic model. The best way to remember is it is a kind of similar to a kind of fireworks here. Now the last model that we would be talking about is the Latin American city model. The Latin American city model is much more similar to the last discussed model, that is the multiple nuclei model. This model is one of the very recent models given in 1980, and then it was later updated in 1996, so kind of very new, given by Larry Ford and Ernest Griffin for Latin American cities. Now, why this model came into existence? So before, in the previous era, there were European colonies in Latin America, and these colonial powers, basically what they did was they demolished the old cities. So the old cities were demolished and they tried to rebuild them in the European styles. So this process of rebuilding, there were colonial legal codes that were known as Law of Indies, which basically were propounded by the Spanish people here. And because of that, there came a need to develop the city model. And this was the basic city model. You have the CBD in the center. Near the central business district, you have the market. There is a spine that connects the central business district to the mall. Then you have the elite corridor here. You have the zone of in situ accretion. This zone is basically the region that fulfills the local timber demand and the mud demand. Then you have the squatter settlements. These are the squatter or the slums that basically disseminate into the CBD. So this is the zone of disseminate, that is, they are moving into the CBD. These squatter zones are known by different names in different regions. So you have colonias, that is known in Mexico. Then you have the veredas, that is known in Peru. And finally, you have, from the word invasion, you have invasionists, that is known in Colombia and Ecuador. So these are the major squatter settlements here. Then you have the industrial park on the periphery. You have this yellow zone, which is the maturity zone. And finally, this is the zone of gentrification. Gentrification means slow and gradual decay of the region. Now this commercial spine, which connects the CBD to the mall region, this is a kind of very important. The classic example is in the Buenos Aires. So you have in Buenos Aires, you have 3 boulevards that stretch from the central plaza to the various regions. So this is a kind of model that was propounded mainly for Latin American cities and how the Latin American cities grew and developed in the region. And finally, let's discuss this. This is the middle class zone we have here. So these were the 5 models that we have talked about today. In the next class, we will be talking about how the cities grew and the morphology of the various cities. So we'll talk about the rank size rule and the primate city rule, and how these two are kind of different concepts and what is the basic essence behind these two theories. So stay tuned for the next lecture. Have a good day ahead.